In accordance to the period of determining Guam's political status, there existed a constitutional convention supervised by the United States of America. This constitutional convention was comprised of a series of constitutional conferences in which delegates of the island drafted several instances of constitution for the people of Guam and their right to self-determination. Judy Guthertz will be providing us with background information on the Guam Constitutional Convention and discussing her role as a delegate during the constitutional conferences.
All the delegates were elected by the people of Guam, 32 delegates, by district. And I was elected to represent my district. And we worked for approximately a year in writing the Constitution. We included provisions in there that reaffirmed certain rights for the Chamorro people, including fishing rights, agricultural rights, and other rights that currently the Organic Act does not provide for. It's quite a document. Unfortunately, when the referendum was held, it was held 2 years after the Constitution was written. And the date of the referendum was controlled by the legislature, and they kept postponing the referendum date because a number of senators did not want to see changes in terms of the current practices in the government. They did not want to see more balance in government. They did not want to see their powers in any way trimmed, and therefore they rallied. They joined with certain groups to rally against the Constitution. And one of their tactics was postponing the referendum for 2 years. So by the time the referendum was held, this was no longer a focal point of the people of Guam, and not a lot of people came out to vote. It was held during a special election day, just for that purpose. So there was a low voter turnout. After we finished developing the Constitution and hopefully getting it passed, then we could move on to the political status question. Now, the rationale for why we needed a Constitution was not just to replace the Organic Act, as a basic document, of the people of Guam, not a document of the Congress, which the Organic Act is. It was written by the Department of the Navy and Department of Justice for the U.S. Congress. So the Organic Act is not a homegrown document. Now, but the value of the Constitution would be that it would immediately, upon approval, delink us from the Organic Act. We'd have our own document, and then we could improve upon it as we proceeded. We could amend it. I think after the first year we could amend it and start putting in place those things that we really need that we don't have under the Organic Act.
Our next speaker will be discussing his role in two Chamorro activist groups that rallied for self-determination during the Guam Constitutional Convention. The first group is OPIR, which stands for the Organization of People for Indigenous Rights, and the second is called PARAPADA, which may stand for People's Alliance for Responsive Alternatives or People's Alliance for Dignified Alternatives.
I wrote the incorporation papers to establish the Organization of People for Indigenous Rights, which is commonly now referred to as OPIR or OP. The purpose of the organization was to educate the people of Guam about the fact that we had a human right, and we also had a treaty right under the Treaty of Paris to exercise self-determination. Those of us in OPIR believed that the Constitution was ill-advised. We believed that before you can get to write the Constitution, that you had to exercise your right of self-determination. So you could establish and determine what your form of government was going to be and what your relationship was going to be with the metropolitan government of the United States. And in our recollection of U.S. history, the United States wrote its Constitution not because King George said, I authorize you to write a Constitution, they wrote their constitution after they exercised their right of self-determination in the Declaration of Independence. And they wrote the constitution that they wanted, not copying the British form of government, but establishing their own form of government. Those of us in OP were insulted that the US Congress said, you shall write a constitution, it shall include this, 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 and this, it shall acknowledge your relationship to the United States, and you must do all these things. And we just felt that that just wasn't proper, that if you were telling us that we're going to write a constitution, then we should write the constitution the way that we want. So I then wrote the incorporation papers of a new organization, and we called that Parapada, or P-A-R-A-P-A-D-A. And if you speak Chamorro, you know that that could be double entendre. It could be for para, para for, or para stop, pada to slap, or pat on the back, either one. And we were able, as a small organization, ironically, I was governor's legal counsel at the time. I actually hand-carried the Constitution to the states with the governor. He gave it to President Carter, and the U.S. Congress then passed it. I hand-carried it back to Guam, but at the same time, I was leading the Parapada group to vote no on the Constitution, and we were able to convince the people that they should vote no on the Constitution. We succeeded.
So far, we've learned that 1. The Guam Constitutional Convention was unsuccessful in terms of not being able to get the Constitution approved by the legislature due to negativity coming from the Chamorro activist organizations. 2. We also learned that Parapada and OPIR, the two Chamorro activist organizations, worked towards the main goal of informing people of the right to self-determination and how the people of Guam should be able to practice that right. Activism is as significant today as it was back then because the U.S. has still not granted Guam the right to self-determination. In fact, a problem today entitled the military buildup is a controversial matter between the U.S. and the island of Guam. The U.S. military buildup consists of the U.S. military planning to redeploy thousands of Marines and their families to Guam from the Japanese island of Okinawa. This is problematic because a lot of Guam residents are against this military buildup.
It's especially important that Guam exercise its right to self-determination before we move forward with the military buildup, because how they go about it, it will be determined by our political relationship with the United States. I personally believe that the reason why Guam has not been given the opportunity to exercise that right of self-determination is that the United States wants to keep us under its thumb. It wants to keep us as a colony, and not being able to voice our concerns about whether or not we want this military buildup or how it's done. So it really is imperative that we exercise that right before we do it. And if the United States was smart, they would understand that, fortunately or unfortunately, most of the people here have since become very beholden to the United States and would probably vote for a statehood of closer relationship with the United States. And they would probably have a better chance of moving things forward if they would just allow Guam to exercise its right to self-determination.